Hello and welcome to Gabbett Media. I'm Grant Abbott and today we're going to be continuing our painting of the bridge over the River Seine. Today we're looking at the water. Do check out the links in the description for my website and playlists and other things that might be useful to you, like what I'm using in terms of kit. But without further ado, let's dive in. See what I did there? Dive, water, dive, yeah. So I'm into the texture painting workspace, as you can see up the top here. I'm not sure what I've got selected, so I'll just go to object mode and select my water. Let's turn overlays on so I can see that I've selected it, and then back to texture paint mode. Now I can't see the nodes at the moment. Occasionally that's because they're just off the screen and you can press full stop or period key on your numpad and that will zoom you into the nodes. But in this case they haven't actually got the texture, so I'll just go up and choose the correct texture. There we go. And I've obviously already given it a basic blue colour. Now I've got two windows at the side again. So one window I tend to have on the brush settings and the other I have on the texture in case I want a textured brush. And sometimes it's a good idea, instead of using the outliner as the outliner, change it to a reference image or something. I've got mine on another screen and I'll quickly show you those. So at the moment for some reason I'm on the smear brush, so let's choose the fill brush and choose exactly the type of water we want. So we want not to go to the full blue here, but I would say water's a bit more, of course it's blue because it's reflecting the sky, but a bit lighter over to this direction and maybe a bit more lighter tone. We'll try there and always try it, see how it goes. That's quite nice, but it's very turquoisey, so we'll go a bit more blue. It's got that sort of fantasy feel that we want, so I keep trying different ones. And remember your colour palette down here. If you like the look of one, you can always add it to your colour palette. I'm just moving about a bit, seeing what they all look like, and adding a few to my colour palette for the sake of variation. So I'll go across to the greens a bit here, and add that one as well. Now I've got sort of three different sort of bluey colours. Let's have a look at that first one again. I think that's probably going to be the best. It's always tricky with a base colour because you can't quite get the feeling of it just yet. So once we've got the fill, let's go to our texture draw brush. Oh, it's worth pointing out as well that in my node setup, I've got the Node Wrangler installed. I think we've been through this before, and I press Control Shift left click on my texture, and that brings up the texture with an emission node, and that's much easier to see. If I go through the BSDF by Control Shift left click on the BSDF, you can see it's got lots of shadow in and things like that, which actually is a bit confusing when you're painting. You can sometimes render with that. That is possible. I wouldn't recommend it though. I'll explain more about rendering in another episode, but Control Shift left click, or you can set up the emission node yourself if you haven't got the Node Wrangler installed. But why haven't you got it installed? It's great. Okay, so let's start painting our water. The first thing we do is add some colour variation. So nice big brush, choose one of our water textures. This one's the one we've already got, so let's choose the second one along. Make sure you've got a mix brush. I often forget that I've left it in multiply or screen. Nice low strength, somewhere about 0.2, and just dab some colour on there. And I've just quickly remembered to put my frame rate up to 25. Hopefully that will help us see these colours. I can hardly see it on my screen, so these colours are going to be very subtle. You can just about see them. It's very difficult. Let's try another one. But it's just that tiny bit of variation that we want. So all over our shape, just dabbing away. And again, you probably can't see it on your screen. I can just about see that one there. But it is, I promise you, adding a tiny bit of variation to the water. We only want little bits at the moment. Now let's try something a bit more extreme. Hardly see that either, really. Let's just make sure my thing is working, actually. There we go, it is working. I can hardly see it on my screen. Maybe I need to go a bit further. Let's try some tiny dots there. Oh, back down to 2.2. Okay, yep, so we can just start seeing the variation when I put the colour very different like that. And we do want very different colours in the water because it's reflective, so it's going to pick up all the colours around, and that's why I'm using my colour palette, so it can pick up things like the green from the grass and the dirt and the bridge and so on. We can't paint in reflections because when we move around the camera in our scene, the reflections will stay static and that won't make any sense. So we'll have to either rely a little bit on the material setup, which you can change to have some reflection, or just keep it without any reflection, and that gives it a cartoony feel, which I think is fine and quite nice. So still going across with a few dabs of colour. Not too much. Can you see I'm at 0.2? So very low, just adding in some variation. Okay, so it sort of looks a bit smudgy at the moment. We'll add a bit of brighter variation now. So some really sort of saturated blues. Changing my colour picker and just moving it up and about the place. Well, that's very bright and vivid, that one. Okay, so we've got the beginnings of a very simple stream. I think the dark patches might be a bit too dark, but we can smudge them in together if we want to. And it's a good idea to sort of follow a line along with your smudge. I've got mine at 0.6, which is fairly high for a smudge brush. Its default is somewhere around 0.2, I think. And just smudge it across, and then you've got a sort of flow to your water. Very simplistic at the moment, I know. So let's go back to the paintbrush and start drawing in some detail. I'll go to my screen settings. Actually, in fact, before I do that, I'll go to the multiply and do the ends. So I want the ends to sort of look like they've been cut off. So they're going to be a bit darker as if they're underwater. So if I go to this angle here, then I know I won't be painting any of the other object. On my multiply brush, choose one of my blues and just bring it down slightly in terms of tone. And some around there, and just brush across it a couple of times. I'm still on a low strength because I don't want to go overboard with this. But can you see now it looks like it's been cut off and we're looking through the water. That looks great. And just there as well. I start off from here and then I usually go around the bottom just so I can see how it's working. Try not to get that sharp line. Can you see it there? So if you've got a sharp line like that, you can always undo or just smudge it out. And in some ways it's better to actually smudge it out because then you know you've got right to the edge and then you just smudge it out so it's not too harsh. If you've got a high poly model, you can have a sharp line there, but if it's low poly and you see the line, you can see all the sort of edges and sort of sharp kinks like we can here. Sometimes it's unavoidable though, but we'll see how we get on. Okay, so with the multiply brush still selected, we might as well keep with it and just paint in our edges down here. So there's a bit of shadow coming from the bank. So fairly light still, just brushing away at 0.2. Don't go too far, just dab it in slowly. I might have gone too far already actually. We've got a bit of shadow there. We can go around this rock as well with a bit of shadow like that. And I say don't go too far. Certainly don't go too far in. You can right at the edge give it a nice dark line sort of separating the two. But already we can see it's starting to get a bit of shape and sinking in with the scene. Sinking in, you see what I did there? I'm not sure about doing that actually. I feel like I want to fit it in with the bottom there, but that wasn't really working for me for some reason. In fact, can you see how my brush doesn't want to paint on the areas where it's sort of crossing over with the other shape? So what I can do is I can isolate it and then I can paint. Still seems to be having trouble, but at least I can get to the edges here. Now let's go back out of isolation mode and see how we got on. Yeah, just watch out for sort of weird bits like this. It's just the brush glitching slightly. I do hope they work on the painting mode actually in Blender. I think that's missing a little bit. I know they're obviously working on the sculpting mode at the moment, which is very exciting. And if you follow Pablo, or no, who is it? Can't remember. The person on Twitter, they are doing some amazing stuff. And they post a lot of their work and how it's going on Twitter. And it's just, very excited about that. Okay, so you can see the difference from this end where it's sort of meeting the bottom a bit. And this end, I'm not so sure it's working that well, but I'm going to go with it. Like I said, I do sort of experiment with some of these things. Sorry if I experiment on you guys. Just making this a bit darker. That's getting there. It might be a bit too bluey and vivid. We can change these things up as we go along. Okay, we need a bit of white in there now. So I am starting to work on the detail. And the white bits are the most important bits for getting that sort of wavy look. So we'll go to our original blue there. Quite a small brush. Somewhere around here. We'll go to the detailed in a second, but this has got to be fairly small and just wave across like this. It's quite a fun bit, this. Careful they don't overlap. You kind of have to be a bit careful here. They can overlap a bit, but so not like this, basically, not like that. It just doesn't quite work, and it doesn't make complete sense. just a few wavy lines separate from each other. And following a flow as well, that's kind of important. I should have said that to start off with. So you're flowing down the river like this. The more white you have, the faster the flow looks. Okay, now we're going to go into a bit of detail with these. So I might up the strength just a touch, and then give a few of them a little ridge, and then you can go off to one side slightly, as if it's a sort of wave, so you give it a flow like this. I'm not sure how to describe these things. They're sort of like a sickle or something. They're these sort of curves that link into each other. Oop. I'm not doing very well with this stroke. Spamming the undo button there. So they're sort of curving into each other and separating from each other, but sort of in a curve, not straight lines like this. And occasionally you can actually curve them into each other like this. That might be a bit too ambitious. Let's have a look. That's working. That's working all right. Not so sure, actually. It's tricky sometimes. When you're trying to sort of critique your own work, you need someone else to look at it and say, oh, that is awful. Okay, so we're going in here, and we're just sort of building these things up. So nice curves. This sort of links together quite nicely, this bit here. Let's have a look. It's always zooming out, see what this looks like. And it's sort of working, isn't it? I think we're just about getting there. I do need some shade in there as well, where these sort of undulations meet. There's going to be dips as well. So peaks and troughs with water. And you've got to think the peaks will obviously hit the light and reflect it, and the troughs are in the depths. Okay, now we're going to have a line across here. It's sort of an imaginary line really, because this sort of thing doesn't exist, but it does exist in waterfalls, but we're not creating a waterfall here. You could have it going down here if you wanted to, might be quite fun. But I'm just going to create a simple line, a medium-sized brush, and a wobbly line. Make it wobbly, don't make it straight. It just gives it that natural feel, in my opinion anyway. Make my brush smaller and give it a little highlight. You can go a bit higher with that highlight, and occasionally it sort of catches little bits, so you might want to highlight just parts. Like so. This is working okay. Let's go to the other side and fill in that highlight. So bigger brush, smaller strength. That's generally sort of a rule, that is actually. A bigger brush is a smaller strength. Because you're sort of making bigger changes, and then the highlights, smaller brush, higher strength. Oop. You come in with the highlights and you're changing less of your shape, so you can drastically change it a bit more. I think I'm making sense there anyway. Okay, so we've got that sort of flow to the water. It might be a bit fast because my lines are quite long, and that makes it look like it's flowing quite fast. I suppose I should have thought about that a bit more, and shorter lines would flow less. So it's reasonably fast flowing, this. Maybe I need to put a few shorter ones in to sort of break that up. Also, the more white lines, the more rough the water will look, because it's as if the water is peaking all over the place. So I've got to be careful not to put too many in. Okay, so let's get some shading in there. So let's go to our multiply brush, choose a different sort of colour, bring the tone down slightly, and a nice low strength for this. Too high. I'm going to turn off my radius because I want to be able to brush lightly like this, but I want it to stay the same size. So when I had the radius on and I brush lightly, it's very small, and I don't want the small details, I want patches of darkness. The peaks are coming out very sharp, but the troughs will be quite sort of deep. I'm not sure deep is the right term really, but they are deep, but they're bigger. if that makes sense. They're a bigger area. Change the colour up a little bit, I think. So a tiny bit of green in there. Just going into the sort of areas where I think there'll be some depth and the sun doesn't quite hit. Or doesn't hit as much. Hopefully I'm making sense. I feel like I'm rambling on a bit. But I've got that sort of Bob Ross vibe that everybody picks up on. And it's probably because I watched his videos and just naturally picked it up. You really ideally want sort of one side that's light and one side that's dark. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to go to the screen brush, but with a very low strength brush, under 0.1, and not too bright either. That will affect the strength as well. And then going across sort of one side, as if the sun is coming from one side. Don't want it too much because otherwise the water's going to look very rough. And it might look a touch too rough at the moment. If it is too rough, you can go back to the smudge brush. I'm going to put it on a low strength and just give it a little bit less sharpness. I'm kind of trying this out actually. I'm assuming it's going to work, to a degree anyway. So I'm kind of smudging the colours together, giving it less sharpness should look less like it's peaking and troughing, if that makes sense. So the peaks and troughs should be sort of closer to each other if it's less sharp. Okay, I think this is working. I'm still on the smudge brush at the moment, just sort of smudging areas into each other that I think might sort of flow together. Okay, so this is quite fun at the moment. I think it's working. I feel at the end you can see the brush strokes a bit too much, so I'll smudge those in a bit. Yeah, if you've got sort of sharp lines, then doing swirls with your smudge brush will sort of undo that. But if it's too swirly, then you go sort of lines to undo the swirls, if that makes sense. Hopefully I'm making sense with these things. I'm not sure there's many technical terms for sort of swirly and liney and all this sort of stuff. Blobby is another technical term I often use. So I'm going to go back to the multiply brush and just make sure I've got some shadow in here. So let's go to a sort of darker toned purple, purpley blue across there. For my multiply brush, it's fairly low strength still. I'll turn it up just a touch, but I want it fairly low. I just want to see the effects of a sort of dark shadow down here. Let's zoom out. So for me, it's not quite hitting the bank. When I say hitting the bank, it's sort of merging in with the bank. Just want to see what that looks like. Well, that's very bluey. Too much. Undo all those. It's great having the undo brush, isn't it? Never had that, did you, Bob Ross? It's going to come in a bit more grey. It depends really. You might want really vibrant colours. Some people have very vibrant looking pieces and they're great fun. So I wouldn't be afraid of colour, but it can quickly go overboard. So just trying to mix this in, as if there's a bit of shadow on these things. Okay, I feel like that's working. So these rocks aren't sitting incorrectly. I think it's just about working anyway. Just going around these edges, blending them in together. It's funny, I still do get questions about am I using a graphics tablet? And you sort of think, wow, I'm doing well with a mouse then. This is just impossible to do this sort of detail, this quickly anyway, I would say, with a mouse. You can't do brush strokes like this with a mouse very quickly and accurately, in my opinion. I mean, some people maybe are mouse masters. Okay, that's looking quite nice. I feel like we could get a bit of shadow under the bridge now. So the light's 12 o'clock, and directly down, that's what we tend to do in hand-painted stuff. So let's get the multiply brush quite low and about 0.2, and I'm going to make it nice and big. And then I'm going to go like this, as if there's a shadow under the bridge. Like that. Okay, that looks fairly effective. I'm going to bring the brush down and then in the middle. Like that, just do one line, so it's sort of, that's a bit softer I think, we'll go a bit less strength. There we go. And can you see how there's slats, or there's openings? I would like to have a go at seeing if I can do that. So I've got a screen brush, nice light colour, and I want to just do some lines as if the light is coming through. So brush about here. Now, is that working? Maybe, maybe not. I'm probably overcomplicating things. Yep, I'll leave it like that for now. I would like to get a bit more light in here though, so let's get the screen brush. And I'm going to come a bit over this direction with my colour. Maybe that's a bit too... I'll go bluer, just there. And just highlight these areas a bit, as if the sun is coming in nicely right in the middle here, and having no problem hitting the water. So it might have got caught up, and there's some occlusion, ambient occlusion in here that we paint on, but here is going to be hit by the sun nicely. And that's working quite well. I feel like I'm being very delicate with the shadows on the side, so maybe a bit more. Multiply, dark brush, and bigger brush this time. It's quite low in terms of the strength, but just going around, making those shadows come into the water a bit more and around the rocks and things. Let's just see how that's going first. And move out a bit. Got to be a bit careful with that. I feel like I might have gone too far with that actually already. Just undid a few of those steps. And yeah, I think I went too far. Just going to do it a touch. Now I feel a tiny bit like this bit isn't sharp enough. It needs to be sort of cut off, doesn't it? So I'm going to go right in with my brush on the screen mode. Fairly high strength and make it quite sharp. Nice and light. I feel like that's a bit better. This end didn't look too bad really. Yeah, that's good fun. Okay, so that's painting water. Hope you're enjoying the series. I'm a little bit rushed for time, so I'm trying to fit these in where I can. In the next couple of episodes, I'll be doing the transparent plant textures and talking a bit about the particle systems that I added in as well. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helps.